that's a tough decision to make, because to answer your question, if something happens, you're in trouble. Everybody's going to get sued, and you're going to get sued right along with everybody else. Now, the argument would be is, are you going to be indemnified? And as long as you're not acting willfully and wantonly with conscious disregard for the safety of others, merely negligently, then you could not be successfully sued, and the school would have to cover the cost of your litigation. So the legal answer is very simple. But, you know, there's some principles that might take offense if you say, well, you start quoting the school code to them, all right? Here's a school code, pal. Look it over. They might not take kindly to that. So call me, all right? Call Dr. Bates, all right? That's better. Yeah, call Dr. Bates if you have that problem come up, and we'll talk about it. Yes? Brilliant idea. Brilliant idea. Yes. See? There's ways around this. Yes. Very good. Okay. Student grades become educational records under the Family Education Records Privacy Act once they are recorded in a grade book. That is true. Okay, let's skip through a few more of these. I want to save some time for your questions. In fact, why don't we just go to your questions right now, and then we have time, we'll come back to some of these. Well, were there any in particular that you really wanted to get answered? Yes, Karen?
We're talking about making accommodations for religious beliefs. If
Yes.
there are parents who don't want their child to do dissections or other kind of stuff because of their religious beliefs,
Yes. We're gonna
is the school required to provide alternative ways
Yes.
for them to learn the content? Or?
Yes, and I think that we could find some reasonable accommodations there, no doubt about it. Where I was a principal, we had Jewish families, Muslim families, we had atheists, agnostics, you name it. And so we would typically, you know, make all sorts of accommodations for students that were observant. You know, they wanted to go to the mosque on Friday afternoons, or they're going to Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah for the Jewish kids. And so, yes, the only, you know, this case in Massachusetts, I guess, just underscores typically what we'll do is we will make those accommodations. It's the easier way to go. It's the easier way to go, as long as they can get the information some other way. So, for example, for sex ed, or for, let's take the dissection, I would just, if the mom came in and said, look, you know, this is against our religious beliefs, we would just say, okay, great. Well, look, your kid's going to be excused, but here's some alternative methods by which they can gain the same information. And maybe they need to watch a videotape or look at some pictures in a book or something along those lines. But we want to be real sensitive to that kind of multiculturalism, and as long as we can still get to that same point, is make sure that student still gets the information we think is important, it's no big deal. Okay, others, yes. Right.
Can you, as a teacher, require them just to stand up?
You cannot. You cannot require them to stand, because standing is also an affirmation that violates their rights. You can require them to sit quietly and not disturb anybody else. Yes.
Also, for Jehovah's Witnesses, I know they don't celebrate Halloween, so, like, for instance, if we're talking about, like, a history lesson, Columbus and the Pilgrims and things like that, how do you do that without, you know, touching on certain holidays and, you know, being in trouble for all?
Mm-hmm. Sometimes that can be very difficult to do. Yeah, that becomes a very difficult situation. And so I guess I would just want to bring the parent in and would want to sit down with them and find out really, you know, what are those areas that they don't want their kid to be exposed to, and then I guess I would just go through them and say, look, these are some of the times we're going to be talking about these issues, and see how they want us to handle that. I mean, how do you want us to handle this? When we start talking about these things, what would you like for us to do with your student? I mean, I hate to just put her out in the hallway, I mean, send her down to the office, but that's when you get your principal involved. All right, that's when you go talk to your principal and ask for some further advice. And it may be that kind of a deal. You know, we may be on the phone to the school attorney and asking for some advice there as well. Yes, Karen.
What about the holidays? If some parent wants their kids out of school for a religious holiday, are the schools required to accommodate that? Or?
No problem. No problem. As long as it goes back to the Yoder case, and Yoder is the one where it grants the Amish students the right to deviate from the compulsory attendance laws. You know that Amish kids only go up through 8th grade, and that all goes back to the Yoder case. And what the court said in that case is that as long as you know, it's a sincerely held religious belief, okay, that the governmental interest, which in that case was making sure that all students receive a basic education, the compulsory attendance law, the court said, yes, this is a compelling governmental interest. That can be overruled by the court. So in a nutshell, what that means for us as administrators is that if somebody comes into me and, you know, and this sounds in the ballpark legitimate, and it's for a day or two, we're gonna allow it to occur. Now, I had a lady come in one time and wanted to take her kid out for 3 months. She was part of the rainbow people. Part of the rainbow people. I said, well, who are the rainbow people? Well, I've learned that it's kind of a Wiccan, natural, you know, the spirits and everything kind of thing. And so that really is not any kind of mainstream. If they're, you know, Buddhist, Muslim, Jewish, you know, Sikh, you know, any of the Hindu, any of the major religions, it's not going to be an issue. But today's world, where we're starting to get some more less mainstream types of religions, is where the problem is going to come in on deciding, do we grant this or not? The easy decision is to say, yeah, go ahead and go. But in that case, where they want to take the kid for 3 months, we really wrestled with what's in the best interest of the child. And thankfully, she never got back with me, so I didn't have to make the decision about whether we were going to let the kid go or not, or put him on homeschool or whatever. Was there a question back here from somebody? Yes. You certainly could. And well, and you know, I think to some extent, that's why I kind of used the fraction. That's such a silly illustration, because you know some of this stuff. You know, it's look. If your kid's going to get educated, they need to know certain things, and at the same time, we need to respect people's religious values. But the point is that schools have the right to determine the curriculum, and so as a typical rule, we're going to try to accommodate religion as long as that student's still getting that same information through an alternative means. Now, for me, it's going to depend on what are you saying you don't want them to know about. Now, if it's Jehovah's Witness, they don't want them to learn about patriotic holidays. They want them to know about, there's a lot of different things. Boy, that's tough. But I still do believe that people have, you know, see, and here's the whole thing that's neat about school law. And it's cool about being in the schools. See, these kind of social tensions, this is where they get hammered out. You know, we are at ground zero in society. And so this whole notion of, you know, freedom of religion is still being played out, and in very real terms here as far as this kid goes. So on the one hand, you know, I sympathize with their right to their religious freedom. On the other hand, you know, we have a duty to educate students. And so if you're going to be part of the public schools, there's some things that you just ought to know. Right. And you guys are coming up with some excellent hypotheticals that make it very difficult to do that.